11 o'clock on your Wednesday. Welcome in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark, along with you here as we navigate through the month of July, getting closer to SEC Media Days, kicking things off next week. South Carolina will be one of the first teams up. Of course, we'll hear from Beamer and the players that we learned about the other day that will be representing South Carolina. Did have some news that we talked about yesterday in reference to Darren Uscher taking over as the new Director of Player Personnel and Recruiting. And, man, he did not waste any time getting out there and starting to hand out offers, as Chris was reporting on yesterday. Goes out there, offers a couple of notable 2026 guys from the state of Alabama, given his former ties to the University of Auburn. Makes a lot of sense that he would have some inroads with these guys, but again, really hitting the ground running in less than 24 hours on the job is Darren Uscher.
Yeah, I'm gonna make fun of myself. Great, intrepid reporting by taking some offers that two guys tweeted out and retweeting them. That's what I did on that, but. Darren Uscher, guys, actually, it sounds like is not going to be in town, in place, from my understanding, until maybe next week. But as you can do in 2024, you can do a lot remotely. You can do a lot in a transition period. And so this is something that you had picked up on, Wes, that Usher's a guy that, yes, he's going to be organized. He's going to put a team together in his new role because he's going to be heading up a department. But we very much, based on what we have heard, expected him to be very involved in the recruiting process, right? And so we see right here offering Keenan Britt, who's a 2026 talented edge prospect, edge/linebacker out of the state of Alabama. And then offering also Jamichael Garrett from Gulf Shores in Alabama, a class of 2026 athlete who's also got a bunch of offers already. And it seems like not only did Darren Uscher provide the impetus of like, hey, we might want to offer these guys, I know about them, it seems he was personally involved in actually dispensing the offers. So just some early evidence to back up what we've heard that he's going to be very, very involved. And another little layer of something that was revealed, Jamichael Garrett, the 2026 athlete from Gulf Shores, Alabama, says, you know, the typical recruiting lingo when you get an offer after a great conversation with, but he says, after a great conversation with my dog, Darren Uscher. So clearly a guy who's not just going to be an organizational kind of figurehead. He's going to be in the trenches recruiting guys, and we've already seen that.
Which that was DAWG, which is a different layer of dog than DOG, as everybody knows.
Yeah.
Good job working impetus and dog into
you don't hear that often, do you?
Into the same paragraph there, I guess you would say. But yeah, this tracks, and like you said, man, you can get a lot of work done, probably to the detriment of a lot of these coaches' actual family and social lives, the amount of recruiting work you can get done by not being in the office. Yeah. And so for, this, I would say, is really not a shock, not a surprise that he has been already getting involved in sending out some offers. And, I would think that 2026 class is where he can really start to make an impact, because you are still, at this point in 2026, you know who your sort of top priority guys are, but there's still prospects all over the place that, are still emerging. I think Charles Power uses the word bubbling up. Like, wow. maybe locally they already are known, but from a national standpoint, you got to think how many thousands of high school players there are in the country. So this is the case of a couple of guys that are already, fairly highly ranked. And, I think for South Carolina moving forward, it would be very intriguing, though. Is there a guy or two? Both of those were 2026, right?
Yes.
Is there a guy or two that pops up that there's some connection, and then that there's some interest, like maybe a guy says, "Hey, Coach, I'm kind of interested in learning more about South Carolina, even though I already have a top 5. Even though South Carolina wasn't involved before, I'd like to check them out." I'll be, it starts earlier and earlier. So most of these guys, a lot of guys already have made their decisions, but I'll be curious to see, is there a guy or two from this class that ends up being on South Carolina's radar?
I was talking to Bill and Preston this morning, producing on the early game, and Bill brought up an interesting question. Are these guys that were already at the top of, say, Taylor Edwards' list before he was removed from this position and Darren Usher came in? Or is this something that Usher pushed forward a little bit more, that maybe these guys, maybe you eventually get to them down the road, weren't maybe quite in the running for South Carolina just yet?
I mean, it would be hard to say specifically. I would think if these guys were already at the top of the board, they would already had offers, you know. So I think the fact that these prospects tagged and credited him with the offer tells me, these are guys that it was more him saying, hey, probably, hey, Coach White, check out these guys. What do you think? He says, wow, yeah, they looked the part. Offer.
Yeah, more tied to Darren Usher, and further evidence to that, Oregon had offered both of those guys, right? So prospects that Darren Usher is already familiar with, gets over to South Carolina, says, these cats are in Alabama. It's not like they're in California, right? Oregon has a national recruiting profile. They obviously do a lot on the West Coast, but they come to the East Coast and everywhere in between. I mean, one of their top commitments is leaving the state of Texas to Corian Moore, who's, I think, a top 5 overall prospect in the 2025 class, and a guy that, by the way, Darren Usher, from what I've heard, had a big hand in recruiting to Oregon. Big recruiting win from them leaving the state of Texas, which says, I think, even more in 2024 in the NIL era. If you can get a guy out of Texas from Texas A&M, LSU, et cetera, get him to come out to Oregon, that's an impressive recruiting win. But, yeah, Keenan Britt and Jamichael Garrett, the two guys that we're discussing, both also already had offers from Oregon. So probably just an easy built-in relationship already, and two guys that made sense to go ahead and offer at South Carolina as well.
Speaking of a recruiting standpoint, we talked a little bit earlier on this week about, the angst within the fan base in regards to the quote-unquote quality of recruits that South Carolina has been pulling in as of late. A lot of 3-star guys. Well, one of those guys just happened to work his way up to being a 4-star in the latest projections from On3, that being Jaquel Holloman, who obviously, you guys talked about when he made his commitment to South Carolina, has a lot of upside and seems to be gaining more and more attention from the recruiting experts as time goes along.
Yeah, I think if you look back at the comments from Charles Power, not even when he committed, but when Holman got the offer from South Carolina, there were already some of the buzzwords that I'm used to seeing from Charles that means he's really high on a guy. They were already present. And so, we've seen him on some sort of under-the-radar guys step out there, frankly, first and be willing to put those higher ratings by a guy's name. And then we've seen the rest of the recruiting industry at times, it's not always the case, but at times sort of follow behind him later on. And so I think we saw that. You go back to Nick Emamori, you look at, maybe to an extent, Jalen Kilgore, although I think the rest of the industry was fairly high on him too. Lenore Sellers is probably the other biggest example of an in-state guy. But so
Swain.
Yeah, I think for him, there are already signs this was going to happen, but good to see it take place. And I think Charles, being from the state of South Carolina, he understands how things work here, that if you're at a smaller school, it can take a little bit longer for the word to get out about just how good of a player you are. And we've seen these kids, not to stereotype them all, but we've seen kids with similar athletic profiles to Jaquel that maybe are a little bit more under the radar, but athletically are just what you need to see. And then he's great. It's not like this kid's just an athlete and doesn't perform on Friday nights. He's doing it at a little bit smaller school, but he's doing it offense, defense, special teams, never coming off the field, highly productive running back. And so I think Charles has watched enough, he's evaluated enough guys that it's always going to be a little bit of an art, but there's kind of a science to it as well. And this is somebody that he's sitting there saying, well, this guy checks a lot of the boxes from the successful prospects I've seen in the past. Yeah,
and I think if you, you always hear the thing that we say, the adage of, if you're going to miss on athleticism, that's why you see college coaches a lot of times say, well, this guy's raw, but he's got these particular tools. Some of the things that he's missing, you can teach. And sometimes those guys take quite a while to develop. Like, there's another one in the class, actually, Jaquavius Dodd. You know, here's a guy who's got the size. He's 6'5", 6'6". He's already got some weight on him, but he'll be much bigger. He's got the frame to pack on a lot more weight. He's only played football for 3 years. He's a basketball player, and he's still raw. But the thought is he has a lot of the tools you can't teach. And his, I was told, by the way, that his cousin is Kevin Dodd, who played for Clemson. Kevin Dodd literally didn't do much at Clemson until he was a fifth-year senior. And then he ended up being a high NFL draft pick, had a great year. And so sometimes Xavier Legette, you know, coming out of high school, kind of raw, took a long time. But what did Xavier Legette have that he could ultimately fall back on? It's not that he just figured out how to play the game as a senior. Like, he did continue to get better and better. But if Xavier Legette wasn't a huge guy who could really, really run, who had natural athleticism and natural pass-catching ability, you know, he wouldn't have developed into a first-round pick, but he did. And so, you know, some of these guys that I think On3 and Charles, they're ranking, they may take more of a rankings kind of flyer on a guy because they look at him and say, man, this guy runs track. He plays all sides of the ball. He has this size to speed ratio. Ultimately, that's what they're looking for at the pro level, too. So even though it may take a while, if you have those traits, you've got a better chance of developing into a not just a good player, but maybe even eventually a great one.
Yeah, and I think Charles even compared him at the same stage, DeQuell Holman, to Legette, which I thought was a big sentence. But if you look back, like, again, we can't rewrite history here. If you look back, it wasn't until this last season, like, we had heard all the buzz about Legette internally, but sometimes it takes longer for it all to come together and for a guy to translate all of those natural gifts to production on the field. So it's not that far-fetched to compare him, especially when you start looking. You know, I thought Darius Rush was another guy that I think there's some similarities. Again, we're talking about different positions, but when you add in the track aspect too, that was something with Darius. You know, small school, he was a state champion in track across multiple events within track, and so I think there's some similarities there as well. And Holman is a guy who, you know, could be a safety, but South Carolina certainly sees him as a linebacker.
A lot of good things cooking with South Carolina on the recruiting front. I want to remind you, once again, of course, next week is SEC Media Days. We're going to have Jay, Terry, and Elijah out there all week long. Going to be broadcasting live from Dallas, getting you all the insight into what we hear from coaches, as well as pulling a lot of people from around the SEC to cop on with them for some interviews as well. Again, all that coming up next week out there in Dallas. As we get closer and closer to the start of the season, we'll dive back into the Phil Steele Preview magazine and what he's saying about South Carolina for this upcoming season. That's next. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game.
I'm going to hit goal line.
All right.
All right, y'all. Our friends over at Goal Line Framing, Kendall and Joni, they are fired up about the new coaches at South Carolina. They want to welcome home all 4 of the new head coaching hires, and for a limited time only, they also want to offer you, their customers, 25% off of framing or purchases of any sports-related prints or items at Gold Line Framing. Now, we've told you about Gold Line Framing for months, if not really years now. They want to handle any and all of your custom framing needs. That could be diplomas, that could be original artwork, canvases, jerseys, flags. As I said, any sports-related prints, 25% off right now. In a business for over 20 years. Head on over to 511 12th Street, West Columbia in-store. They've got an art gallery for you to look through, home decor, furniture, and gift items all right there if you're looking for other ideas. If you have questions or you want to set up that framing, call them today, 803-739-1337. Again, that's Gold Line Framing.
Do we need to make a case for who should be? Make a case. Be a good last second.
All right, if you're getting hungry like I am, you know who we're going to recommend. It's our friends over at Firehouse Subs. Shout out to owner and operator Larry Chandler. He runs all 14 of the Midland's Firehouse Subs locations. And guys, behind the scenes, we're not going to give away the goods yet. We're booking our next Firehouse live show. It's going to be later this month. Date, time, location to be disclosed later. So go ahead and start getting ready for that. I know I'm ready. In the meantime, get yourself a Firehouse Sub, one of your favorites, or one of the limited time only offerings, which right now, for a limited time, again, the barbecue Cuban sub, Southern roots with the Cuban twist. Get that or any of your Firehouse Subs favorites, lunch, dinner, or even catering orders for that event you got going on. Use the Rapid Rescue to go to avoid the wait and order online. You can do it at firehousesubs.com to find the place closest to you, or download the Firehouse Subs app, earn yourself some rewards on future purchases, and avoid the wait and order online with the Rapid Rescue to go.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, and Chris Clark on your Wednesday as we are sitting at 52 days away until South Carolina kicks off the season against Old Dominion on August 31st. We've been making our way through the Phil Steele catalog that just recently came out. And, you know, Phil ranks his individual position units for the entire country, and we expect South Carolina's defense to be better overall this season. And when you look at the individual, units, he has South Carolina through all three levels of the defense within his top 30. So you have the defensive line at 20, you have linebackers at 21, then you have defensive backs at 29. So a lot of expectations from, again, the expert on college football that South Carolina's defense should be among one of the better ones from a national standpoint in college football this season.
Yeah, I think these magazines, especially as much work as Phil Steele puts into it, they're really good for just adding context. And so I think it's easy to get caught in our bubble. And if you want, like, the day-to-day, just blow-by-blow, every little detail of what's happening in a program and really what's really happening in a program, frankly, that's what your local coverage is for. But I think it's very easy to, because it's impossible to follow all the other programs as closely as we do here locally with South Carolina. So it is important to have good national resources for stuff like this. And Phil Steele, you may not always agree with him, but he has a method to everything he does and has for a long time. I would say he's been one of the more analytical figures out there in national media before the analytics side even became so mainstream. So I have always respected what he does, and I think this is somewhat of a good sign for South Carolina that there's some agreement. Now, I think there's probably some guys. I went through the position groups and was just looking at them as far as how they were in the SEC. And one of our posters actually says there's a little bit, there's maybe a situation or two where it doesn't quite align. Like maybe they're ranked 6th in the SEC, but then if you look at the national rankings, there's more than that teams ahead of them. So maybe there's a little bit of, there's like a million pages in this thing. So
sure,
a couple things may be off along the way. But point being, a lot of these units for South Carolina, top 5, top 6, when we're talking about some of the areas we've talked about as being much improved, defensive line, linebacker, they are actually pretty high on South Carolina's secondary as well. I think, Chris, that comes from returning a Nicky, returning DQ Smith, returning Jalen Kilgore, O.D. Fortune. So locally, we also know, hey, who's going to step up at that other spot? That's something to keep an eye on. So I think there are some positive signs, though, from Phil Steele and his numbers, his metrics, that this could be an improved season.
I'm thinking back to a couple, and I want to get back into the defense specifically and what he said about them there. But thinking back to what he said after Beamer's first couple of seasons, projecting the next year. One thing that he said, and I think it was during an appearance on the game, I think he was on Jay's show, he mentioned after the 2021 season, hey, I think South Carolina's going to be a lot better on offense. And one part of that was, of course, adding in, he knew Spencer Rattler would be on the roster. And I think his eyeball tests and all the analytics that he runs told him that they would be better. Now, as we know, that was a very up and down season offensively for South Carolina because you had what happened at Florida, a disaster. But then you also had an offense that was capable of doing things like hanging 63 points on Tennessee and going on the road and scoring 30 points to beat 31 points to beat Clemson on the road. So I think he was right on that. Now, one thing last year is that he pointed out, hey, South Carolina's schedule going into 23 is getting a lot harder. They're losing a good bit of experience. There were some concerning trends in 2022, even though they were able to win 8 games. But Phil still said, I couldn't get that out, hey, Beamer's bucked the trend the first couple years, so I think they're going to do it again. As we know, it kind of went in the opposite direction. But I agree with you, Wes. I think he always has really insightful thoughts, and often they're backed by data. I'm very, very intrigued by the fact that he does have all 3 of the position groups in that, what is it, top 29, top 30 basically
in the country.
If you look back at South Carolina's, I like to look at scoring defense, ultimately, as maybe one of your best measures. South Carolina in 2021 was, let me double check this. They were 63rd in scoring defense. Last year, they slipped. They were 86th in scoring defense, primarily because of how the first part of the season went. Again, they played a lot better in November. And in between that, they were 46. So they've kind of been up and down, but they haven't had that top 25 scoring defense that we've seen at South Carolina in the past. If these position groups can live up to that type of ranking, where you're looking at it going, that's a top 25 position group, you put all those pieces together, maybe that gives you a top 25, top 30 defense. And quite frankly, I think that's what they're going to need to have success this year.
Yeah, I think it's interesting looking through here, the spots that maybe, at least compared to where things are here locally, they gave South Carolina the benefit of the doubt a little bit, and then some spots where maybe they're not quite as high that here locally we maybe feel better about. And I think one of those spots that I would say, even as not a highly ranked unit, they kind of did give South Carolina the benefit of the doubt, would be the receiver room, which they have ninth in the SEC, where, frankly, that's the position group I'm most concerned about on the entire roster at this point. So I think there is, in that case, now he does put rankings and high school rankings, I should say, and he has his VHT, very highly touted, I think, thing that he puts on a player, and I think he is probably crediting a big jump from Nick Harbor, seeing, he's a 5-star guy. He has him as a projected starter. So that's where the context nationally is still like, hey, this is a 5-star guy. Everybody, if you followed recruiting at all, everybody knew who Nick Harbor was. Here locally, we know, he spent so much time on track.
Yep.
It's an unknown. So I think that's where the national context maybe misses a little bit of the local nuance. Now, the other side of this, I think the one thing or a couple things that could give you quite a bit of, reason for optimism for a South Carolina fan is that the quarterback group is tied for 11th in the SEC, which is basically, from what I can tell, the placeholder for every team that just has a new, inexperienced quarterback. Well, if Sellers is even close this season to who we think he is, that number goes up. The worst unit on the team, according to him, at least in the context of the rest of the SEC, is the O-line, which is 13th of 16 teams in the conference. So can they improve from what we saw last year? Can they improve on that number? He still has them going to a bowl. He still has them improving in the win total, even with, in his opinion, unknowns at quarterback and O-line, two of the most important positions out there. So could there be some upward mobility in the expectations in the upside of this team if they get better play from those two spots than are reflected in this preview?
As high as he is on things on the defensive side of the ball, there's an element of the offense that he does think is going to take quite a step back this year. Not necessarily a bad thing, though. We'll dive into that coming up. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on your Wednesday here on the game.
All right, guys, allow us to continue to tell you about our friends over at Classic Roofing. Joe Reeder, Max Sawyer, two friends of mine. They're going to take great care of you and, of course, your roof. Easily one of the most important parts of your home. You want to make sure you're taken care of. You want to make sure you don't have any of those unsuspected big charges on your roof. So why not go ahead and let them come out for a free estimate and let you know, hey, are there some issues? Are there some possible budding issues here that I need to be aware of for the future? And also, really the biggest question, how much life do I have left on this roof, so you can go ahead and plan for potentially getting some fixes or replacement down the road. What's the phone number? It's 803-590-7870. If you want more information to where you can set up that estimate online or just read about Joe and Mac and their history in the roofing game, you can do that at classicroofingsc.com. Again, that phone number, 803-590-7870.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark along with you on this Wednesday, continuing to navigate our way through the Phil Steele catalog of the upcoming 2024 college football season. Yesterday, we talked about the fact that he had South Carolina projected as the most improved rushing offense in the entire nation. And again, when you have the low level of production you had last year, that you bring in guys like Rocket Sanders, Oscar Attaway, in addition to hopefully having a better offensive line, that kind of speaks for itself a little bit. Right next to that, though, he has the most improved offensive passing units, and South Carolina, unfortunately, is at the very bottom of that list, which can alarm you at first, but when you really think about it, with what we expect this offense to be, with a more run-heavy scheme, obviously, Lenore Sellers being able to run more of those RPO type of things that Spencer Rattler wasn't quite in line to do. Yes, the offense may be a little less pass-heavy, but that's not necessarily a bad thing if the run production can improve like we expect it to.
Yeah, I think a lot of that also, much like we got to give a little bit of credit to possible improvements in the running game to being sort of about that may just be what South Carolina does is run more. Part of the reason they may drop off some in the passing attack has to be that the balance, like the split, just may be a little bit different. And you look at what you had last year, obviously, it's Spencer Rattler. You look at how Xavier Legette emerged within this offense as the go-to target and, ended up having a record-setting season at receiver. And so I think for them, this is going to be a different offense. You go back, not that it was news at the time, but go back to what Dal Loggins was talking about when he was on this show at Pro Day, and how you do have to look around and say, what offense fits the skill set of our players best? And that doesn't mean you're not going to throw the football. That doesn't mean Lenore Sellers isn't going to, throw the football around quite a bit, honestly. Like, I think he's one of those guys who absolutely can spread the ball around, has a big arm, but especially as a young player, to not, you're kind of going to do yourself a disservice. If you have a healthy Rocket Sanders, Oscar Attaway, Jordan Howell, who I continue to hear more and more buzz about him, and a guy that's 245 pounds and 6'3" and can run and throw and all those things, you're doing yourself a disservice if you're not introducing the running aspect a little bit more than you did last year, where you had a veteran Spencer Rattler and a first-round pick in Legette.
You remember how many times over the past few seasons we would see South Carolina execute a zone running play, and there would be, rightfully so in some cases, to be honest, a million message board posts and tweets saying the quarterback's no threat to keep this football, and this time around that won't be the case, because you do have a guy that is a threat, and that's an element that I think you'll be more comfortable introducing if you're South Carolina. Certainly the idea of Lenore Sellers as a runner is something that defenses are going to have to account for, even if you're not actively, forcing that by calling an RPO, calling a zone read. You do have to keep it in the back of your mind that, hey, if we don't contain this guy on a third down, he can easily get a first down. If we crash down and completely just try to take away the back on some type of zone running play, there's a good possibility this guy could pull it, or he can pull it and throw it on us. From that standpoint, Sellers is not going to bring, at least immediately, some of the things that Spencer Rattler brought you. But he is undoubtedly, from a physical standpoint, going to bring some things that, maybe Spencer didn't. Spencer got so much better last year. We talked about it all last season with his legs, extending plays. I was talking to somebody recently who really knows ball, and they were like, it still gets lost how good Spencer was navigating in the pocket, navigating outside of the pocket, using his legs to pick up key yardage, extend plays, get first downs, running the ball. That's all true. But Sellers is a different kind of threat, whether it's short yardage or some of those scramble-type plays.
Yeah, I think we saw that. Was that the Vandy game where late in the game he was in and he kept on the zone read and just put it in another gear and was gone into the secondary and then scored. And I think with Spencer, we saw a little bit more of, you look at it, you're like, oh, it's zone read. He could have kept. But a lot of times I felt like they had it tagged with it's more of a zone read RPO where he can either hand or throw whatever the route is tagged behind it. I think they, that could easily be like quick slant or a little quick hitch. I think they did quite a bit of. And whereas for Sellers, I think you maybe will see a little bit more traditional zone read potentially. I think there's some things, maybe something that's a little bit overlooked. I think there will be some things with the tight ends in the blocking game where you have a couple of guys who seem to be pretty hard-nosed. I think we saw that physicality from Josh Simon last year. And obviously a hard-nosed coach in Sean Elliott who will have his hands on the tight end room, both just in terms of development and what's expected out of that position group, but run game coordinator as well. So that's something when you want to talk about things that I'm still curious to see how they play out in terms of like intricacies and stuff like that within this team here locally. What does the Sean Elliott stamp on that running game from a scheme standpoint as you kind of potentially remember we were talking how many years ago about like melding the Spurrier offense with the Sean Elliott running scheme.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're kind of talking about potentially, the Dow Loggins pro-style scheme, mixing that in with Sean Elliott and what he's done. And I'll also be curious to see how much, if you're Dow Loggins, how much do you lean back on some of the things that were done at Arkansas with KJ Jefferson and Rocket Sanders as well?
That would seem to be a good idea.
Yes.
Those 2022 when Rocket Sanders rushed for 1,400 yards and KJ Jefferson also had a big year. Those things work pretty well. To go back to the receivers, though, Wes, because I got a little off track on a thought there and then started going to Sellers in the run game. Yeah, I think this is something we've said before. They don't have, at least right now, maybe a guy emerges, right? Maybe they have a 1,000-yard receiver this year. I don't know if I'd bet on that, and I don't. A guy hasn't really proven, hey, he will do that at this level at South Carolina in the SEC. But last year they had one in Leggett who exploded for 71 catches, 1,255 yards. But do you know how big the gap was from a yardage standpoint between Xavier Leggett and the second leading receiver? Putting you on the spot. Got a guess?
It was large.
You were correct.
What was the second leading receiver even a wide receiver?
It was not.
Yeah, so how many did Leggett end up having?
71 for 1,255.
Did anybody else even have 400 yards?
Nope.
Yeah, I was going to say the second leading was in the 300s.
Yeah, Trey Knox, 37 balls caught for 312 yards. Next receiver was Amarian Brown, 26, 265. So the point I'm trying to get at is, maybe you don't have a 71 balls for 1,255. If you do, that's great. But I think it's key. What does guy 2, 3, 4 do in that receiver room? On paper, I think they may be better positioned with some of the guys that they brought in. But we'll see. That's going to be a key part of it.
But I will still maintain Amarian Brown, if not for the injuries, was headed for a big final season at South Carolina.
I agree. That's always going to be a what if for me, a what if player.
And I feel for him because of that. Like seemed like a great dude, and I think was talented. Certainly had the ability. Looked like he was about to break out a couple of times, in my opinion, but then had nagging injuries every step of the way. It felt like.
Again, we'll see how who emerges in that wide receiver room as well as the tight end room once the season does get here and we get rolling on August 31st. EA Sports has released another list in the lead up to the College Football 25 video game release coming up next week. It's top 100 players. Who is on the list? Did any Carolina players make the cut? We'll dive into that coming up. It's Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game. back-to-back after the Sports Minute. So it'll go from one right to the other. Okay, your mic on? Where's the... You still got a minute.
All right, I don't know if you guys noticed, it is hot in the Midlands right now. I've certainly noticed, and the other day I was upstairs, and it was getting a little hot. And so I called our friends at Krantz Cooling and Heating, family-owned and operated right here in the Midlands, HVAC service and installation since 1983. That's who I trust to handle our HVAC needs, whether it's cooling in the summer, heating in the winter. They help us take care of all of it. I called them out. One of their outstanding technicians came up and let me know kind of the good, the bad, the ugly. My system's getting a little older. We're making plans to replace it. Honest, trustworthy, right now, free second opinion if you happen to have a leak in your coil or compressor. If you got any issues going on, they can help you with preventative maintenance. They can help you check out any problems, and they can install for you. Krantz Cooling, Krantz with a K, Cooling with a K, KrantzCooling.com. 803-672-3224.
All right, y'all. Big video game coming out soon. Perfect excuse to upgrade the man cave. Always looking for an excuse for that. Football season right around the corner as well. Call our friends at Integrated Media, 803-948-8327, or head on over to integratedmediainc.com. Again, if you want to upgrade that man cave, maybe you want to go all in and turn an extra room in your home into a home theater system, they can do that for you as well. Anything that involves upgrading the audio and video in your home, TV installations, security and cameras, and it could be something really simple. It might be maybe the living room TV you want to have hung on the wall, but you're just not quite comfortable doing that yourself and hanging that expensive asset on the wall. They can come out and do that for you, make it look great, and, of course, make it safe as well. Hit them up right now, integratedmediainc.com or 803-948-8327.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark with you on this Wednesday, rounding out today's show. You guys excited that Arch Manning has now opted in to EA College Football 25? Got a commercial and everything out of it yesterday, as well as about $60,000.
Don't care, but that was cool.
That was cool.
Like, I don't really care about him being in the game or not in the game, but well played. Well played, Eli Manning. I mean, didn't y'all feel like Peyton Manning was at least for our era, was like the Manning with the most personality and the biggest kind of forward-facing guy?
Sure.
Eli has, in recent years, I feel like, really let his personality come out. And so that the video, if y'all haven't seen it, go check it out. I'm sure EA tweeted it and Eli tweeted it and the other Manning tweeted it. And so I think EA has killed the marketing on this game. Like
1000%.
they have been awesome. And to even kind of have a play on the little, I'm focused on football as part of the video.
That was the funny part. He was thoroughly focused on football until an offer was dropped.
Well,
that was not $600 in the game. And I really, I kind of in jest say that.
And we brought it up when it was announced he wasn't going to be in the game. Like, I don't know how much of a distraction of just putting your information in an app and receiving a check in a game is actually going to be. But regardless, they got him in the game now. You can play with him if you want to. If you want to bench Quinn Ewers and play as Arch Manning, you can. I wouldn't recommend that. Quinn Ewers is in the list of top 100 players. He is the third highest rated quarterback, 27th overall in the top 100 at a 92 rating, only 1 point behind Carson Beck and Shedeur Sanders, who come in at 93 overall.
How about the glow up for Carson Beck compared to what we thought of him this time last year?
Might be dating a Cavender twin.
Yeah, I mean,
Got a lot going
allegedly.
Allegedly.
Supposedly. But now one of the top two highest ranked quarterbacks in the game. I mean, I remember going into that South Carolina Georgia game and being like, "Hey, I don't know if this guy has shown that he has it yet." And he didn't really play that great, especially in the first half against them, but he steadily got better and better and better. But guys, no Gamecocks in the top 100.
Could you make a case, impromptu, make your case here? Could you make a case for anybody to be a top 100 player in the country?
Yeah, you could definitely make a case. Let's also simultaneously, real quick, make our case. Who will be the top player on the South Carolina roster? We did this a while back, I think.
Ooh.
They also have apparently they've leaned on PFF a little bit in terms of doing the ratings. Obviously, we know your actual on-field productivity is going to be a big part of it. I think being all SEC and like having your name out there within the college football landscape is going to be a part of it. All that said, I thought it has to be somebody out of Debo Williams, all SEC linebacker, Nicky, Tonka Hemingway, who actually is the highest graded returning player on defense, or Rocket Sanders.
Egregious of you to leave out Hunter Rogers.
Well, we don't even know if Hunter made the cut.
He might not be in the game.
I'm not saying. I mean, we don't know.
I think this tomorrow we get the full roster reveals. I believe
the graphic said we got the rosters today, but all they put out was 100. So I don't know. Hopefully they still are putting out the full roster.
Maybe so. We'll have to find out. Maybe then if Rodgers made the cut or not.
By the way,
hopefully so.
I've never heard of this pre-download. You can pre-download the game. What is that?
Where it's ready to go.
It's ready the second it's available.
Midnight on July 16th.
It'll just drop in.
Play.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Man, a lot different than when we had the cartridges that you had to put rubbing alcohol on and blow into them with a Q-tip.
Showing his age. What is pre-download?
Tyler's like, what's a cartridge?
Listen, hey, I know about blowing into the cartridge to make it work correctly.
Yeah,
I understand.
You do. I feel like you would, recognizing how they're doing it and the metrics, I think you can make an argument for any of those guys. If I'm making the rankings for South Carolina, I feel like it's got to be Rocket. Like who else has the
Kai Kroger?
Yeah, right. But who else has the bona fides of someone who can say, I had a 1,400-yard rushing season in the SEC? Like, nobody really gets quite to that level.
Yeah.
Now, he hasn't done it here, but he has done it.
If he was coming off that last year, too, I think it's a little bit like, it's a no-brainer.
Yes. And he would be on that top 100 list also.
So, Quinshot Judkins is way up this list.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go back in, like, all the stats and metrics for that season, the top two backs in the SEC, almost no way you like, however you want to frame it up, were Quinshot Judkins and Rocket Sanders.
Yep.
So Rocket, because of being banged up last year, Arkansas wasn't that good anyway. He's not quite getting the love, and now Judkins is, even as a transfer, and I would say rightfully so. Like, the kid's really good. I'm not saying he's not, but it's just funny to look at how neck and neck those two guys were as far as what they did in the SEC 2 seasons ago, and now what the perception is of Quinshon Judkins.
By the way, Quinshon Judkins, a 95 overall, the 9th ranked player in the top 100.
Number 9. By the time they're done, Josiah Thompson, Dylan Stewart, Lenore Sellers, at least, I think all those guys have a great shot to be in the top 100.
Well, this list, by the way, confirms that no South Carolina player will be ranked above a 90 because Quentin Cooley, the running back at Liberty, comes in at 100 with a 90 overall rating. So the best are probably going to be at least in the 80s.
There's a 90, there's either a 90 below those guys or an 89.
Yes, exactly.
Will be the highest.
For Shane Beamer, there's clear anti-Gamecock bias.
There's
needs to be posted in the locker room.
bulletin board
I'm starting
material.
to wonder if Carolina's in the game, to be honest with you.
Well, we got that one clip of Delp putting somebody on skates, right?
Okay. You're a Georgia fan, Tyler. Get out of here.
It was in the trailer.
We
What
got
can I say?
54 minutes through the show without the...
All right, that'll do it for today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show, Terry Ford up next here on the game.
You know who's not a Georgia fan? My guy Andrew at Midlands Home Renovations. Head on over to MidlandsHomeRenovations.com or just call him today, 803-580-6501. Have you been dreaming of that home makeover? Just not sure where to start? Call them right now. They specialize in whole home, kitchen, bath transformations. They're one of the top-rated general contractors in the Midlands. You can rest assured your home is being placed in outstanding hands. They're going to talk to you. They're going to sit down with you. They're going to take your vision. You can explain it to them in as much detail as you want, and then they're going to tell you how to bring it to life with expertise, creativity, and, of course, dedication to every single project. Again, that website is MidlandsHomeRenovations.com, where you can set up a chance for them to come out and help you take your vision and bring it to life. Or you can just call them right now, 803-580-6501, Midlands Home Renovations.
Halftime show. Terry Ford, glad you could be hanging as we go till 3 here on the game. And, of course, like we've had all week, our bevy of producers and assistants and helpers getting us through the week as our good buddy Ed Bird has been out. We're hoping Ed will be back and ready to roll here really soon with us. But David Dare once again till 1. Then, unfortunately, Terry Ford